get into Washington. So we got Kyle Kuzma. He's honestly the most interesting player. Rui Hachimura, that's a guy that I really like as well. I like Corey Kispert just because he can be a sniper from outside. He can rebound the ball a little bit. Yeah, but again, I'm not Daniel Gafford, another one of those guys. But again, big man depth we have up front. So those would probably be the three names I'm the most interested in from the Washington Wizards. But what about you?
I think this is really hard because, like, I don't really know what the direction is for this team because, like, obviously we're talking a couple weeks ago about a two big man lineup and, you know, Stewart and Duren. Like, if we feel like that's going to be, you know, your 4-5 going forward, then yeah, you look at kind of the centers on their roster. Like a Vernon Carey Jr., who was a, you know, really high recruit out of Duke, you're probably going to say no. Daniel Gafford to me is just, I think Pistons fans, if they saw him play, they would get hyped because he's just so tough as a player and he will just go up and dunk it. He doesn't care. Like, I remember him and Thomas Bryant in Washington was that 1-2 punch. Daniel Gafford was, every time we would play Washington, he would just shit on us. Like, I was like, dude, I want Daniel Gafford on my team. But you look at his contract, he's making less than $2 million. So, I mean, he's still at a rookie deal and he's only 24. He's 6'9", 230 pounds. So, I mean, that's a guy that I think is really interesting. You mentioned Rui Hachimura. I think Hachimura is interesting. I think he's developed a lot over the past couple of years. I think Hachimura and Kyle Kuzma are the two names that Pistons fans would probably zero in on the most. Kyle Kuzma, one, because he's from Michigan, and he's just been balling out. Shout out to Flint. Like, he is just balling out right now. I think he's probably having a career year with Washington. And Rui Hachimura was a really high lottery pick from a few years ago that I'm sure some Pistons fans would want to take a chance on, but I feel like those are the two names that make the most sense to me personally. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I like Kyle Kuzma. I mean, because, man, dude, he just played phenomenally. And especially since he's from the state of Michigan, it's really cool when they're connected that way. I'm with you. I don't know what the Pistons are trying to do because if it's a two big man lineup like Duren and Isaiah Stewart, then I guess I don't know. Like, for the guy the people we get back for Saddiq Bey, if this trade does happen, are we expecting them to kind of have a similar role to Saddiq Bey? Are we bringing them off the bench? Is that what we're doing? Or are we moving Bojan to the bench? Because if we're getting Kyle Kuzma, I would rather have him and Bojan starting and forget the two big man lineup. I'd rather roll with like Duren or Isaiah Stewart at the 5 and then keep Kuzma at the 4 and Bojan at the 3. I'd rather do that because it makes the most sense. But if we're going to trade for Kyle Kuzma and we're going to bring him off the bench, I mean, I don't know. That just kind of seems like a waste of his abilities. But on the other hand, if we're trading for Rui Hachimura, I like him to come off the bench because I think he can play either guard spot, but also he's good at playing without the ball. Like, he's the opposite of Saddiq Bey. He doesn't need the ball to be effective. I mean, he can score with it, but he can move without the ball, and that's what I want from that forward spot. So yeah, I guess the Wizards I'm most intrigued by, but if we're going to trade for Kyle Kuzma, we got to abandon the two big lineup and do what we were doing earlier in the season with Saddiq and Bojan, because it doesn't make sense to bring Kyle Kuzma off the bench.
Yeah, it doesn't. And this is what is so unique about trades. Like, we're trying to analyze, okay, like if we trade Saddiq, what are we trying to do? And I would say 9 times out of 10, when you have that thought process, it usually doesn't happen, right? Like, yeah. I think of a Pistons trade from a few years ago. It was under the Van Gundy era. Well, we traded for Tobias Harris, right? We traded Ersan Ilyasova, who was a rotational piece, and a injured Brandon Jennings coming back from an Achilles tear. Like, trades happen all the time that we don't hear about. And, you know, at the time, Tobias Harris was an up-and-coming player in the league, and a lot of people are really high on that trade. They thought the Pistons won that trade. I think if you do trade Saddiq, it's just because you feel like the offer you got is just you can't pass it up. Like, I don't think you're getting a star player in return for Saddiq Bey. I don't. I think you can get a rotational player, and maybe if you're lucky, you can get some draft compensation. I don't think you're going to get a star player in return for Saddiq Bey. I think a lot of Pistons fans think that Saddiq Bey's value is higher than it is. And I said this last week, Pistons fans do this all the time. They overvalue their players. They think that the players that we draft are, these high level players that teams are going to offer us all these draft picks or, these star players for. I think at the end of the day, what Saddiq Bey's value right now is you're either getting a starter in return, you're getting draft capital, or maybe, you match salaries with another player and you upgrade at that forward position. I don't think you're going to get that much in return for him because you have to remember he's still on a rookie contract. So he's probably going to have to be traded with somebody else. It's not just going to be, Saddiq Bey for, said player. Like, you could do Saddiq Bey for Rui Hachimura, but that doesn't really move the needle, I think, for either team. I think when teams come out of a trade, they want to feel like that, they've won the trade. I mean, if you're just doing player A for player B, it just doesn't make sense for either party.
What do you think? I mean, is Kyle Kuzma, is he too much? Do you think he's too much of a player for Saddiq Bey? If the trade package was centered around Saddiq Bey, like, is Kyle Kuzma too good of a player for Saddiq Bey alone to net you?
Yeah, I think if you really wanted Kyle Kuzma, I think Washington would probably want draft compensation, or they want another young player or a rotational piece, because we're talking before the pod. I mean, they're a playoff team right now. They're the 7th seed. And maybe they want Marvin Bagley. Maybe they want Bojan. Maybe they want an Alec Burks. You're going to have to throw in something more than just Saddiq Bey for Kyle Kuzma, because at the end of the day, Washington wants to compete for the playoffs. And if you're not trying to help them compete for the playoffs, I think Saddiq Bey for Kyle Kuzma, they're hanging up the phone in 2 seconds.
What would you say to people, though, that are like, look, you guys are talking about Kyle Kuzma, bringing him to the Pistons, but he's only shooting 30% from the three-point line. What else does he bring? Even talking about Rui Hachimura, like, what do these two bring to the team, and why do we want them on the team versus someone like Saddiq Bey? I mean, I get the 20 and 8 in 3 from Kyle Kuzma, but he is only shooting 30% from 3. What does he bring to a team where you would be willing to give up Saddiq Bey for him?
For me, Kuzma is a 3-level scorer. Even though he is shooting, 30% from 3, he's a proven player that produces. He's a player that I think could play with Bojan. They could play off each other. And I think that's something that Saddiq has struggled with so far this year. I think Kuzma, to me, makes so much sense for the Pistons that I think it would make them a better team instantly.